Welcome to Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. The return to school has been underway since September, and schools, families, and teachers have worked to ease this transition back to the classroom. While many students face challenges brought on by the pandemic, educators and families are paying attention to the needs of students with special mental health and educational requirements to ensure that they are receiving the right supports for a smooth return to school. Today on EdCast, I'll speak with an education services specialist to identify the strategies that parents, students, and educators can use to assist these students as they come back to class. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today is RueZalia Watkins, Education Services Specialist at Vibrant Emotional Health, also known as the Mental Health Association of New York City. She works to find solutions to increase access to education and services for students facing emotional, behavioral, attention, and mental health challenges. RueZalia is a former vice president of the United Parents Association, where she served as an advocate for parents of special needs students. She's one of the founding creators of the Parent Empowerment Program, which seeks to train parent advocates throughout New York State. Thank you so much for joining us today on EdCast, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Addressing the needs of special education students is really important, and that, along with so many other things, has been exacerbated by COVID-19 and the pandemic. So I want to go back to the beginning. I recently attended a workshop at CUNY on special needs students, and it became obvious to me that most of my colleagues were unaware really of what the term means and what some of the distinctions are. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us some context for a few minutes and describing what do we mean by that term and what are we looking at?
So when we talk about neurodiversity, actually it's a wonderful term for us. It's a wonderful term for society because it lends credence to disorders that very often have been misunderstood. So when we think about ADHD and whether it's real or not, or we think about the spectrum that's involved with autism, or even when we think about concrete things like dysgraphia and the difficulties with writing, you know, we tend to wonder, what is this disorder? What does it come from? And it's very much like all other things involving the brain. There is this stigma. So when you look at neurodiversity, it puts these disorders in a particular context that's almost stigma proof, because it allows you to understand that these are neurologically based disorders that impede learning in most children and, I dare say, adults.
Yes. So would you say that neurodiversity is the term that we should be using now? I noticed that the DOE is still using special education or special needs.
Well, you can't really compare the two. So,
Okay.
to look at neurodiversity is to look at a whole group of disorders. Right? Now, are these disorders related to special education classification? Some of them are. But when we think about classification, special ed classifications like visual impairment, which includes blindness, that would not necessarily be considered neurodiverse. Okay, so neurodiversity is connected with all of those disorders that impact the brain and impede functioning in children and adults. Then there's still some gray areas, like when you think about developmental delays. Well, when you think about developmental delays, are those a part of neurodiversity? You know, I'm not a pedagogue or a clinician. So when I answer these questions, I still have questions. But what's most important to understand is that special education services are connected to a law. Neurodiversity is a description of a class of disorders.
That is such a helpful distinction. Thank you so much. That is very helpful. So looking at these areas, then I guess the next question is, how do we identify the needs that students have? They're obviously diverse needs. How are they identified in schools?
So, so special education law, it's actually a law, um, actually started in 1975, and back then it was called the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act. And later on in 1990, it became the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But back in 1975, when it was called EHA, Education Handicapped Act, for short, that's, I I am a disabled person. I'm mostly in a wheelchair, not in this space, but any other space other than this, I'm in a wheelchair. So for all people like me, I apologize for that term because I know it is offensive, but that historically was the beginning of special education, because a lot of disabled people were really receiving services literally in closets or being hid or pushed out of the way. So this particular act really began our whole discussion about least restrictive environment and free and appropriate public education for special needs students. And in this act, which we now has evolved to IDEA, there are certain standards. So there are terms in the law like child find, which means that any school has the responsibility to find a child, a student that may have special needs, and then evaluate them and determine what those needs are, and then provide the necessary services. Similarly, in the special education process, anybody can make a referral, which generates this comprehensive evaluation process, which includes a physical, it includes a psychological and an educational. In New York City, those are combined into one assessment called a psychoed. It includes a classroom observation. It includes a conversation with parents to get a clear indication of the development of the student, and also the strengths of the student, which is what all education services should be based upon. So this comprehensive evaluation process is then used to determine not just what services the student needs, but also what is the student's classification.
Now, do parents usually initiate this assessment, or does this happen when the child is in school and the school might initiate it?
So the school might initiate it, at which point they have to notify the parent, and the parent still has to give consent for the evaluation. So if the parent doesn't agree with their child being evaluated, there's one process. If a parent goes to school and says, my child is not progressing, they need extra help, they are not learning, then the school can initiate the special education process and start the evaluation again once the parent signs consent. But this is the interesting part. We don't want children to just be placed in special education. So if a student is struggling, the school should be trying to figure out, what does that student need to learn? There should be a history of the school's work with the student to try to help them in the learning process. There should be evidence that a teacher tried a particular strategy to help with reading, or tried to resolve math, or tried to help with writing. There needs to be some history that the school has been trying to work with the child. The child is not supposed to just automatically be referred to special education services.
That's another very good point. I want to then go back to COVID and this transition back to school. While this transition, I think, has presented difficulties for many students, what do you see as some of the special barriers for the special education students in coming back to school?
Oh, well, there are just so many numerous, but I first have to say this, there are students that have mental health challenges, and students with certain disorders that did well with remote learning. And then on the other hand, I think about the high school students. High school credits are based on seat time, how many minutes you spend in each class. So when I think about those deficits, I become worried. But to answer your question, the challenges for students returning to school after COVID are just enormous because one, how many losses have there been? How many students have lost relatives? How many students suffered, not just the poverty before COVID, but just this sense of austerity and difficulty living in the COVID environment that was created by the shutdown, which of course was necessary. How many students live in households with a lot of different people and have really no space? Or how many students are living in shelters? How many students are living in homes with domestic violence? And even when you look at families that are privileged, how many students were affected by isolation or perhaps a different type of dynamic in the household that was painful? So and then so it the demographics are not as important to me as much as it is that we recognize that every student returning to school is returning to school with something.
Mhm.
Okay, I won't call it baggage. I would call it a haze, consolidation of their COVID experience. So no one can say that every student is going to be fine or not going to be fine. I'm sure there's students that return to summer school and they were fine, but now in the fall, they may not be. There is no one size fits all. And that's always been the case, even before COVID. So when I think about the difficulties that students may have,
Mhm.
I always have to look at the fact that I don't know what they are.
Well, let's go back a
I
step.
don't,
Let's
sure.
take a step back. I know in terms of remote instruction, I was surprised to be reminded that it was helpful for some students, particularly for students who benefited from having closed captions on their screens and having a transcript that they could later go back to, which
Right.
actually made some of the instruction easier for them than listening in a lecture class where, where they have to take notes, and that can
That,
be much more
that's
difficult.
That's correct if you had a device.
Yes.
Okay, but we also had students that did not have devices. So, and now they're returning to school. So it is just such a kaleidoscope of various experiences that it's really difficult to come up with one single approach or one single strategy for a group of students. You really have to um, look at the individual needs of that particular student at that particular time. And I think the school system is trying to do this through the various screenings that they're establishing to both look at the social and emotional wellness of students, as well as to get a sense of where students are academically. And it's also interesting that in looking at students academically, they are looking at student strengths, which is something we always wanted them to do. But now it took COVID to do it. And ironically, now maybe you need to look at what is missing or what happened to the body of knowledge that students have attained from 2 years ago. Is it still there, not there?
Let's go to that. I'd like to be more specific now because I know we always say things like looking at strengths, not coming at students from a deficit model, but I'd really like to see how we put that into practice. So what does that really look like in a class? First of all, you certainly have pointed out with all these variables that students come to school with, how difficult it is for schools to address all these issues because there's so much variance. But going back to what I think is a very important commitment that you have, because you mentioned it to me about looking at strengths, having expectations that are high, not looking at students from a deficit. How do we know that schools are doing this? As parents, as educators, what should we be seeing happening in classrooms that are letting us know that this is the lens that we are looking at our students through?
One of the things that I look for in a school to show evidence of strength-based practices is the schedule, the time, okay? Because in order to meet the needs of individual students, particularly after COVID, you need time. You need time to address the needs of individual students. So I would be looking at the schedules and how the time is divided up during the day to support learning. I would also look at things like, and not all schools are able to adhere to these types of safety protocols, but I would also be looking to see things like, are the teachers in middle schools, are they moving around and the students are staying in the class and the individual teachers are moving from class to class, which is what the strategy is supposed to do. Because that time not moving from class to class gives you more time to explore education and also help students to really prepare for what's coming next. Whereas normally they'd be slushing through the hallway, talking to their friends, making plans, all of that stuff, and then go to the next class. But somehow having the class being homogeneous and in one location is helpful for that kind of dedication of energy towards instruction. I would also be looking at the screening processes. What are the screening tools that schools are using right now? So there's a multi-tiered service system that's being implemented that's supposed to look at what do all the students need, or let's say 80%. 85% of the students need in one school building. So, for example, is there a middle school? I love middle school. I think that's where it's at. I think that we don't pay enough attention to middle school, so I always go to middle school. So for example, maybe it's a middle school, and through the screening that's been the academic screening, they've determined that math is really not where it needs to be. And we already know, the data is already showing that math is actually the most impacted subject from COVID, more so than the other ones. So pardon?
More so than reading.
More so than reading, yes. Okay. So when you do a universal screening in the whole school and you discover that all the fifth grade students are having problems with this math, you change the school day to provide an evidence-based math curriculum to help those students. You're not saying, oh, your math has gone down, we're going to send you here after school, even though there are recovery services that are after school, particularly for special needs students. But this multi-tiered system allows schools to create universal interventions for the whole school. And maybe there's some other students that still need a little bit more support. So they could still provide more intervention to a smaller group of students, maybe putting them in a different location. Maybe it's, all fifth graders that are in a certain functioning level that they're going to work on. And then there's an intense level where you provide really, really tight targeted, evidence-based pedagogy to those particular students. So having that kind of structure allows you to really build upon the student's strengths, because even though you're only looking at what the problem is in 5th grade, right? You are also allowing the student to breathe, to adjust, to get used to being in school. You're not at this point where, you know, creating a strength-based approach doesn't mean at this time in our lives, doesn't mean saying, oh, this person is good at this, let's teach them this. But a good teacher knows student strengths. And that's not so much the issue. The issue is, do they have the time to use those strengths to help a student where they may need intervention? So this multi-tiered structure allows schools to create those kinds of opportunities.
I wanted to ask you, there seems to be a trend recently in, I guess, mainstreaming might be the word, or a hybrid
Inclusion.
Inclusion, okay. And I happen to know a friend of mine, her 4th grader is in a classroom like that. What is your feeling about that? And this would be just to tell our viewers again, where special needs students are put in the same classroom with non-special needs students. There are some extra supports that are built into the classroom, some teachers that are specialists. I want to know what you think of that approach.
Let's go back to the law for a second. Okay, so we have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the primary education law that serves our students throughout America is the Elementary Secondary Education Act. And this law, which started also in the late 70s, early 80s, this law governs all education for, particularly for students from low-income communities, but it is widely used throughout America on farmlands, in cities, in suburbs, everywhere. So this law under President Bush was called No Child Left Behind, right? And at the same time that No Child Left Behind was authorized, the law was updated and amended, there was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. No Child Left Behind said that all students need to have certified teachers. Well, we didn't have teachers that were certified in special ed and subject areas. So the solution was to bring the special ed teachers into the general ed classroom. And that's really how the inclusion process began.
But do you think that it's a positive thing? I mean, we're running out of time, so
I'm sorry, for some students it is positive, but not for everybody. There's no one size fits all. So for some students to be a part of a group of 15 students working with a special ed teacher, with the rest of the students, 20 or so, with the general ed teacher, for some students, it's fine. For some students with ADHD, it's very difficult, because how do you focus when you're supposed to be doing this and somebody else is doing
you know who you're putting into that environment?
That's correct. That's
In
correct.
the few minutes we have left, and there are only about 2, I know that you are a very strong parent. No, you're so informative. You are a very strong parent advocate. And I'm always hearing, you know, unscientifically, that parents have a hard time getting special ed services for their children. It's such a bureaucracy. What do you say to parents? How do you help them? What can they do to get the services their children are entitled to?
I say to parents, please realize that there are advocates that can help you navigate this system. It does need help. You do need help to know how the school system works. And there are advocates all over the state that can help you through that. There are websites, of course, you can go to, but even people who are professionals, when it comes to their child, they need help. So I tell everybody to look for help, you know, search for educational advocates. They are numerous places. We have them at Vibrant in our family youth peer support programs. There's Include, there's Advocates for Children. There are all kinds of places where you can go for help.
We have completely run out of time. I'm just going to throw in that you also mentioned run for office, run to get on a committee. I know you mentioned something about parents serving on a community education.
It's really
That was a good one.
Okay,
Get out there.
I'll try to do it quickly. We are one of the few municipalities where parents run the school system. It used to be that they were considered school board members. Now they are community education councils. And yes, parents need to go to their PTA, be involved with their schools, get involved with the district, and yes, run to be a CEC member.
I have learned so much from you today. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. RueZalia Watkins, Vibrant Health. It has really been so informative. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. Is the right to freedom of speech under attack? One could point to evidence on both the left and the right to say that it is. Inside Higher Ed reports that to combat this growing concern, alumni groups from Cornell, Davidson College, Princeton, UVA, and Washington and Lee University are banding together to defend academic freedom. The Alumni Free Speech Alliance is nonpartisan and vows to protect the rights of faculty and students across ideologies. According to Edward Yingling, co-founder of the Princetonians for Free Speech Alumni Group, free speech and academic freedom are critical to the advancement of knowledge and to the success of our colleges and universities. How do voters feel about public education? A poll, America Speaks on Public Schools, surveyed their opinions. The poll found voters are committed to and feel positively about their local public schools. They are committed to investing in these schools, and they support increased funding for public schools, even if it means their taxes will go up. Raise your hand if you like PowerPoint presentations. Raise your hand if you use them at work. Edutopia reports that reducing the use of PowerPoints in classrooms might increase student engagement. Rather than relying on the lecture mode style of PowerPoints, educators are calling for teaching methods that allow for open-ended questions and more student-generated content and materials. Might be good advice for the workplace too. Now let's talk about a game that traumatized me in lower school, Dodgeball. Education Dive reports that while the classic physical education game is being tossed out by educators who say it encourages bullying, some see it as an opportunity to model valuable social and emotional skills. Those opposed to Dodgeball say that it is an aggressive elimination game that uses humans as targets. Others believe it is similar to other American sports and can still be used to teach empathy and deal with aggression in a positive and productive way. If you have any memories or thoughts about Dodgeball and schools, let us know at cunyedcast@gmail.com. That's it for this edition of EdCast. See you next time.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.